"The bastard! Who gave you the nerve to look at me with those eyes, you filthy black?" Officer Carter growled, each word like a knife aimed straight at Beckham Brooks. What started as a routine document check meant to intimidate and humiliate quickly turned into an outright arrest under the stunned gaze of a powerless crowd. Little did they know the man Carter was trying to drag through the mud was a federal agent, one who specializes in exposing abusive cops like him. What state are you in? If you were bullied like this where you live, what would you do? Comment below. We want to hear from you. Beckham Brooks sat alone in a small eatery tucked away behind a street corner, where the sound of the doorbell mingled with the clinking of dishes and the faint aroma of roasted coffee blending into the morning air. Light streamed through large windows, reflecting off the worn wooden table, creating a familiar atmosphere like a morning ritual for the locals. A few regular customers quietly chatted, while the sound coming from an old radio played gentle jazz tunes, harmonizing with the peaceful yet slightly still ambiance characteristic of a small-town city. Beckham wore a burgundy vest, sharp and neat, enough to make an impression without being flashy. The white shirt underneath was buttoned neatly, paired with polished black leather shoes, giving him a refined but unpretentious appearance. His gaze focused on the coffee cup in front of him, as if immersed in a dense stream of calculated thoughts. Each time he took a small sip, Beckham maintained his calm, a slightly cold expression without losing control. He kept his mind steady against the constant pressures coming from work. In that silent moment, thoughts about corruption and racial discrimination within the police force were still vividly present. Beckham knew the road ahead was not just a fight for justice, but also for the survival of himself and his companions. Yet his eyes still shone with determination, like a quietly burning flame enduring in the darkness. He would not allow himself to collapse before hardships. On the contrary, every moment was preparation for the next challenges. When he stood up and left the eatery, Beckham walked firmly amid the flow of people on the sidewalk. The sun gently shone through the tree canopy, his shadow stretching long on the pavement. The atmosphere remained normal. Footsteps and murmurs blended together. However, the eyes of some people nearby showed caution and curiosity. Some glanced at him, their eyes containing undeniable suspicion, as if judging something unclear. Beckham noticed the difference but responded not with anger but with alertness and vigilance. His gaze did not leave the path leading to the car parked at the curb, waiting to take him on another arduous journey ahead. That focus was not only vigilance toward the outside world, but also a sign of an unyielding will. Beckham carried the mental strength of an experienced man, one unafraid despite facing pressure from deep and unfair prejudices. Each step he took on the street was not merely a morning journey, but a silent declaration of resilience and unwavering determination. Two white police officers stood at the street corner, their eyes scanning the crowd as if scrutinizing every face. Carter, a man with a stern face and a clearly conservative manner in every gesture, held the dominant position. Beside him, Nelson stood silently, his gaze indifferent but full of respect for his colleague's authority. The combination of Carter's decisive attitude and Nelson's complicity created an invisible, threatening pressure. They observed Beckham Brooks from a distance, exchanging covert remarks, their eyes full of contempt and suspicion. Harsh comments based on racial prejudice thickened the atmosphere around. Carter firmly held power, seeing Beckham as an easy target to assert dominance, while Nelson, though not active, showed no opposition or intervention. Deciding to approach, they walked toward Beckham with a rude manner, without clearly explaining the reason but signaling him to present identification. The question was posed more as an order than a polite request. Beckham remained calm, his voice steady but sharp as he asked back for the reason behind the check, his eyes never leaving those closing in on him. Carter replied with vague words and an unclear attitude, offering no legal justification but merely implying provocation from Beckham's cold gaze and confident demeanor. Insulting remarks like, "You bastard, who gave you the nerve to look at me like that, you dirty black man?" growled Officer Carter. Each word stabbing straight at Beckham Brooks echoed, making the atmosphere suffocating. Nelson stood nearby, silent, but his eyes closely following Beckham's every move, like an observer waiting for a reaction. A simmering conflict began to flare, each moment pushing the tension higher. Bystanders started to stop, their curious and worried eyes directed at the three men. Sighs, whispers, and looks filled with concern created a tense circle around Beckham and the two officers. The injustice in Carter and Nelson's conduct became clearer as Beckham maintained his calm attitude, refusing to let emotions overwhelm him. Though composed, Beckham showed determination, with sharp eyes, ready to face any situation that might arise. He would not accept this irrationality and disrespect, knowing that keeping calm was a major challenge under such circumstances. His gaze seemed to send a warning signal while conveying the steadfastness of a man not easily defeated. The scene ended with the three standing face to face amid a crowded street, where the city's sounds blended with a loaded silence, like an invisible battle silently unfolding. Beckham remained calm but clearly resilient in his eyes, signaling that he was mentally prepared for upcoming incidents, refusing to be passive or overwhelmed. Carter took a step closer, his eyes quickly scanning Beckham's face before lowering his voice. "The way you're looking is problematic. This is a quiet residential area. We have the right to question anyone acting suspiciously." The words came out like a warning wrapped in vague reasoning. Nelson stood behind, hand near his belt, his gaze showing clear boredom, as if he was all too familiar with this one-sided dialogue. Beckham did not move. He slightly tilted his head, maintaining steady eye contact, neither challenging nor intimidated. "I had breakfast at the cafe over there. My car is parked out front, and I was about to get in and leave. Exactly what suspicious behavior have I displayed?" His voice was steady, each word carefully chosen, as if he were dissecting every layer of their pretext using legal language. Carter curled his lip and raised his voice. "That tone is a sign of defiance. You're uncooperative and showing an attitude. If you know what's good for you, show your ID before things get worse." His face tightened, not just because of the situation, but as if Beckham's presence instinctively irritated him. Nelson interjected sarcastically, "Or maybe you're acting like that because you've got something to hide?" The casual remark was meant to sow suspicion, implying Beckham was guilty. Carter seized the ambiguity to step forward, extending his hand as if ready to touch him. Beckham held his ground, looking straight ahead. "Neither of you has provided any legal reason for your actions. If this is your standard patrol procedure, maybe this city should reconsider its operational standards." His tone was factual, not sarcastic. The calm reply thickened the tension. Nelson's silence felt like tacit agreement, and Carter visibly grew irritated. He raised his radio and said a few brief sentences. His face stiffened and his voice lost its earlier disguise. "We have the right to detain you for identity verification, and your uncooperative attitude is making the situation worse." No one needed to ask further. The reason had been fabricated in the moment from unchecked emotion. Around them, a few people began to pause. An elderly couple walked slowly on the sidewalk, glancing back with hesitant eyes. A young man near a traffic light pulled out his phone, not immediately recording but seeming to weigh the situation. His gaze settled on Carter's hand near the handcuffs. Beneath the surface of silence ran a tightening tension. Beckham keenly felt every gaze cast on him, every small movement by the two officers. His composure did not ease the atmosphere. On the contrary, it made the two men accustomed to obedience feel threatened. Carter shifted slightly forward, his posture trying to close the gap between authority and truth. Yet Beckham stood firm, neither retreating nor yielding, as if injustice itself stood bare in the street. Carter wasted no further time. He stepped in close, signaling Nelson to flank from both sides, then pulled the handcuffs from his belt. Carter's eyes locked onto Beckham's, as if imposing a punishment without trial. "You're causing a disturbance, refusing to cooperate. I'm detaining you for investigation." His voice was fast, leaving no room for dialogue. Beckham did not react. His shoulders stayed steady, no resistance. But his eyes had changed. No longer cold, they sharpened with something deeper than frustration, a silent resolve. When the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, the metallic sound echoed through the street, not loud, but enough to make bystanders pause. A woman carrying a child passed by, turned her head, her expression wavering between curiosity and suspicion. A few steps away, a young man raised his phone and started recording, eyes fixed on the three figures in the middle of the street. Nelson locked the cuffs, neither hurriedly nor roughly, but with an indifferent attitude like a programmed machine carrying out orders. Carter stood opposite, looking at Beckham as if asserting control. A subtle satisfaction showed clearly, as if binding the hands of a well-dressed man proved the power of the uniform and badge. But Beckham's silence unsettled that image. Pedestrians gathered nearby, mostly silent. Some took out phones, others just watched, their eyes revealing a tension spreading like spilled oil. No one asked why, but no one left either. The silence in their gaze was not consent, but waiting, as if they knew this was wrong but were unsure how to respond. A teenage boy next to a bicycle stared at Beckham's cuffed wrists. He whispered to the adult beside him, but the voice was drowned by passing traffic. Among the crowd were angry looks, held back by fear of the uniform. There were also detached, indifferent stares, as if this were a common scene, nothing surprising anymore. Beckham was led a few steps away, hands cuffed behind his back, head slightly bowed to avoid the sun glaring down on his forehead. His walk was calm, but steady and firm. Each step seemed to strike down the injustice pounding on the hearts of witnesses. Carter kept one hand on his radio, reporting briefly, then tugged Beckham's arm lightly, as if to pull him out of the crowd's view. The sound of shoes hitting pavement rang steadily as they took Beckham toward a nearby police car. In the slanting sunlight, the scene became the focus of the entire block. No shouting, no scuffle, but the dense tension felt almost tangible. In the eyes of the people, Beckham was no longer just a man being escorted, but the embodiment of something bigger, long smoldering, yet unnamed. Carter, though standing as the one in power, seemed to sense something slipping beyond his control. The silence he created now betrayed him, second by second. Maya Collins was standing across from the diner, holding a small notebook where she jotted down observations for her weekend report on urban sanitation in the residential area. She was a freelance reporter, a familiar face to audiences who appreciated investigative journalism, especially with a social critique angle. Thin and agile, with bright eyes and a warm, mellow voice, Maya habitually recorded everything instinctively, rather than following a script. When her gaze stopped on a black man surrounded by two police officers right in the middle of the street, her notebook immediately lowered. Maya paused her pen and stood still for a few seconds to observe. The distance was close enough for her to hear a few words from Carter spoken in an unrestrained tone. The rigid gestures and imbalance in behavior between the two sides made Maya instantly realize something unusual was happening. Her hand quickly swiped across the phone screen, opening the camera app in a familiar move. When Carter pulled out handcuffs and restrained the man, later identified as Beckham Brooks, Maya activated live streaming mode. "You are watching live from the West Side neighborhood." Her voice came out concise and steady, though not cold. "A black man in a suit has just been detained and handcuffed by two white police officers for unknown reasons." She panned the camera just enough to get a wide angle, ensuring all three people were in the frame, while overlaying short subtitles through an integrated app so the audience could grasp the situation briefly. Maya knew well how to guide visuals, so the information delivered was strong yet not misinterpreted. Only minutes passed before the screen showed the viewer count steadily rising. The first comments appeared below the video. One account left the line, "What is the reason?" followed by "Another baseless arrest," then "Send this clip to a civil rights lawyer." An account with the icon of an anti-racism organization started tagging related groups. Maya noticed the reaction spreading quickly, feeling as if she had just opened a window for others to see something they usually only heard about silently. She kept the camera steady, moving slightly to record the entire moment Beckham was brought toward the police car. She tried to maintain the clarity of each person's face, especially Carter's expression as he glanced at the crowd slowly gathering. The lens swept past several tense faces of residents, capturing confused eyes and phones starting to rise from different spots. Maya spoke little, letting the city sounds, footsteps, wind, and scattered conversations become a natural soundtrack. Every frame was a slice of reality, unstaged but powerful enough to impact viewers' perception. When the police car drove away, Maya flipped the camera back toward the dispersing crowd, then looked into the camera briefly. "We will follow this case to the end." That final sentence was not a declaration, but a commitment. She ended the live stream, saved the original file, and knew in her mind that everything had just begun. Maya Collins's live video spread almost instantly. Within less than an hour, the footage was shared by numerous influential accounts in the civil rights community. Familiar faces in activism, from lawyers and independent journalists to NGOs, began circulating the video with brief, alerting captions. Social media platforms quickly shifted from observation to outrage. Hashtags appeared all at once: justice for Beckham, police abuse, racial profiling. Initially scattered, these phrases climbed trending lists within hours, forming a digitally pressurized front. Online communities are grouped into smaller clusters, some re-explaining the video frame by frame, others analyzing it from a legal perspective. The shared sentiment was no longer surprise or momentary anger, but a familiar uprising of old social wounds, freshly opened by a seemingly outdated but still subtly present form of abuse. Debates erupted simultaneously. Some accounts defending law enforcement voiced support for the two officers' actions. Arguments included preventive risk, routine check procedure, and suspicious subject attitude. However, most viewers rebutted by citing exact dialogue and behaviors in the video, pointing out contradictions and abuses of power. These rebuttals were sharp and methodical, forming a solid counterargument. Several former police officers and legal experts appeared publicly, sharing the video with candid assessments. They analyzed the arrest procedure carefully, comparing it with internal regulations and federal law, clearly highlighting violations by Carter and Nelson. A former inspector with 20 years at the Los Angeles Police Department called this a breaking point in field inspection standards. Civil rights lawyers started offering legal representation, with many ready to provide free support. Traditional media also covered the event. Regional stations like Channel 14 and Metro State News reported on the incident, citing Maya's account. Reporters were dispatched to the scene to find witnesses, record community reactions, and collect additional footage. A larger newspaper scheduled an interview with Maya about her filming process and personal observations. The local police department's communications office became overwhelmed as calls and emails surged. The spokesperson refused to answer on the same day, but internally, an emergency meeting was convened. Journalists waited persistently outside the precinct for official statements. The sentiment, "silence equals complicity," spread rapidly, generating demands for transparency from media and the public alike. Maya did not stop after the live stream. She continuously updated the situation, posted behind-the-scenes images, and shared analytical articles with personal notes. In a later post, she confirmed handing over the original video to civil rights lawyers to preserve legal evidence. For Maya, the story did not end with view counts, but began with the social reactions it sparked. She understood well that a clip could not change the whole system, but could crack it open from a deep enough point. Inside the police station's administrative area, the fluorescent lights cast a thin layer of glow over the metal desk where the files lay. Elias sat beside a computer monitor, scrolling through the data entries sent from the holding cell. His face was young, jaw neat, eyes focused but without signs of tension. Since being transferred to the station, Elias had maintained a calm demeanor, spoke little, and always followed procedures without often showing personal opinion. Veteran officers often joked, half seriously, half grimly, calling him the fresh-faced recruit, implying that reality would erode his naive view of justice. The name, Beckham Brooks, appeared clearly on the screen. Elias paused briefly, his hand loosening off the keyboard. A flash of astonishment crossed his eyes, but it quickly retreated behind his rimless glasses. In his mind, an image surfaced from an old article. Beckham standing outside a federal courthouse, holding a stack of documents, his gaze cold but not distant. Elias had read his legal analyses on civil rights and police intervention cases, and even cited them in his graduation thesis, which he spent an entire semester refining. He could not be mistaken. The man who had just been handcuffed in the street was the same one civil rights lawyers mentioned as a symbol of systematic, peaceful resistance. A wave of tension spread from his neck down his spine. The torment suddenly became clear. Beneath the uniform he wore was an ideal nurtured by stories like Beckham's. Yet now, the very system he was part of had just done the opposite. They demeaned a man through actions Elias knew violated administrative standards. He wondered if silence meant safety, or if it was an indirect complicity in what he once despised. The shift handover ended, and other officers left the detention room. Carter was laughing at something down the hall, his heavy footsteps echoing through the empty corridor. Elias stayed behind. He glanced quickly around, then turned to the corner camera, subtly adjusting its lens toward the door to block a full view of the watch desk. His hand slipped into his inner jacket pocket, pulling out a small piece of paper, prepared when he first saw that name on the file. Approaching the cell door, Elias said nothing. He slid the paper through the gap under the door, eyes fixed forward without direct contact. The note bore only one line: "I know who you are. Contact me when safe." Below it was a personal phone number he had newly changed and never used for work. Exiting the room, Elias took a deep breath. He did not know where what he had just done would lead. Part of him understood that interfering with the system would bring consequences. But if he ignored it, he could no longer call himself a guardian of justice. The door closed behind him, leaving inside a small message, but enough to create the first crack. Elias knew that from this moment on, silence would no longer be an option. In an old apartment in the northern part of the city, Elias had grown up with stories hidden beneath the kitchen table, where his father used to sit every night, taking off his police uniform and silently facing his wife and children. His father had been a dedicated patrol officer, believing in the law, believing every wrongdoing could be corrected by truth. But after reporting the abuse of power by a superior colleague, he was pushed out of the force for lack of cooperative spirit. No one said it outright, but in many eyes he was an internal traitor. Elias witnessed his family's decline since then. His father's friends gradually withdrew. Neighbors became cautious, and at school, Elias was always looked at with suspicion. His childhood was quiet days, memorizing every name, every story about justice, but no longer daring to mention it as a source of pride. Instead, he nurtured something else inside, a silent resistance, not with anger or criticism, but with the hope of intervening from within. Elias believed every system could be fixed if someone dared to enter it without losing themselves. At 17, Elias enrolled in the police academy. His mother vehemently opposed, once tearing the registration form from his hands in tears, saying he was walking the same path that had cost the family so much. But he quietly applied again, earned a full scholarship, and ranked top of his class with perfect scores in law and criminal psychology. No one knew his true reason for choosing this profession, because Elias did not tell. He let people think he was a follower of traditional ideals. But in fact, he wanted to see firsthand the cracks his father described, with the eyes that had witnessed a family collapse for speaking the truth. Since being assigned to the current station, Elias did not need long to see what he suspected. There were reports, edited at the last minute, surveillance camera footage losing signal, suspects changing their testimony after closed-door sessions. He observed all, did not intervene, did not accuse hastily, because he knew without evidence, any words would only turn him into the second version of his father. He needed to wait for the right moment, but the longer he waited, the greater his unease, and his patience began to erode. When Beckham Brooks was handcuffed in the street, Elias did not see a man arrested, but an opportunity, a trigger, a beginning with no turning back. Beckham was the man he had learned from, a living symbol of the kind of justice textbooks never fully conveyed. His timely appearance was no coincidence. Elias understood that if he stood with Beckham, he would no longer be alone. They could, together, bring hidden truths into the light, step by step, methodically, following procedures but effectively to the root. Deep inside, Elias did not want to become a betrayer of colleagues. He did not want to carry the label informant wherever he went. He wanted to do things by the law, with strategy, with a plan, as he had studied and trained for years. Beckham was the only person who could help him break out of passivity, turn what he knew into real action. It was no longer a choice but a necessary step, so he would not repeat the tragic cycle of his own father. When Kate Thompson stepped into the administrative area of the precinct, the atmosphere was unusually tense. The electronic information board flickered constantly with internal alerts, phones rang longer than usual, and the duty desk was cluttered with numerous notes marked in red, updated by the communications office. She placed a file on the desk and silently observed through the large glass window overlooking the hallway, where several officers whispered among themselves, glancing occasionally toward the meeting room. Although she had only transferred to the precinct a few weeks earlier, Kate had already created a clear distance from the easygoing colleagues. Her federal background made her a figure to be cautiously watched, especially since her file was linked to disciplinary campaigns and internal reforms. A thin report lay neatly on the table. The name Beckham Brooks was underlined in red pen, alongside the note, "Live stream spreading." Kate opened the document, her eyes scanning familiar phrases like suspicious behavior, non-cooperation, and routine check. She frowned. More precisely, those were euphemisms to cover up the imposition of authority. After opening an additional video excerpt taken from social media, Kate sat silently for a few minutes. Her expression remained unchanged, but her hand drew a pen to highlight several key timestamps before standing up. Carter and Nelson were summoned to the office while everyone else was on a short break. Carter entered with a feigned, tired expression, rubbing his forehead as if just having survived a dangerous criminal chase. Nelson followed behind, speaking softly, eyes avoiding contact. Kate did not beat around the bush. "I want to hear your explanations about this morning's report." Her voice was calm and even, but her gaze did not allow interruptions. Carter began by repeating what had been recorded, adding a bit of emotion that the situation was unclear and potentially risky for the community. Nelson remained silent, hands folded on his knees, not uttering a word. Midway through the presentation, Kate interrupted. "So, how do you explain the camera not capturing any hostile behavior from the suspect, and that the reason for the check was based on supposedly provocative eye contact?" Carter stepped back slightly, his voice wavering. "I acted on professional instinct. If an error occurs because of being too cautious, the consequences are worse. Your instinct just put this entire precinct under the media spotlight, and if I were the lawyer of the person arrested this morning, you would see far more concrete consequences within the next 6 months." Kate's words were as hard as metal, making Carter look away. Nelson remained silent, seemingly waiting for someone else to end the conversation for him. Kate stood up, looking at both of them. "Not only did you violate procedures, but you also forced the entire system to struggle for explanations. This is not the first time a police precinct has been sued for abuse of power. But if it's the first time you see your name in an investigation file, you should reconsider the reasons." She signaled that they could leave. Carter exited first, his expression awkward. Nelson followed, silent, his steps heavy as if leaving part of a burden behind in the room. As the door closed, eyes from the hallway glanced in. Some veteran officers quietly shook their heads, showing displeasure with Kate's blunt working style, but in a hidden corner, 2 young officers exchanged curious looks. Among them was something new. The feeling of witnessing someone daring to break the silent veneer they once considered an unwritten rule. The meeting took place in a small consultation room on the 3rd floor, usually used for small internal meetings. White lights shone down on a smooth wooden table, creating a cold atmosphere, just enough for focus, but not lenient for any emotional conversations. Kate Thompson sat across the table, wearing no uniform, only a dark shirt and black trousers, her hair neatly tied back. Beckham entered cautiously, his eyes betraying a trace of scrutiny, though his greeting was polite. Kate got straight to the point. She said she had reviewed the files, watched the videos, and read the full report. What happened both on the street and inside the precinct made her feel it was necessary to hear from Beckham directly, without intermediaries or reports. He nodded, silent for a few seconds, then responded with a short question, "What do you want me to say that you don't already know?" That question was a test. Kate understood. She looked him in the eye, replying that she was neither seeking a defense nor an accusation. She wanted to confirm whether he was indeed the person civil rights organizations had mentioned, the one who had investigated abuse networks within law enforcement, or if it was all just rumors. Beckham did not respond immediately, but his eyes softened slightly, as if realizing the person before him was not someone trying to evade, but a comrade who had marched through different trenches. He began to share, slowly but confidently. He spoke about a chain of files collected from 3 different states, about a group of mid-level officers protected by overlapping relationships within the system, and about the unusual coincidences between units that had been accused and internal transfers without clear reasons. Each piece of information Beckham offered painted a picture of an underground machine where every loophole was wrapped up in reports and signatures from authorized levels. Kate silently took notes, then cross-checked what she had heard and seen since arriving at the precinct. She recounted being denied access to internal reports during late-night shifts, surveillance cameras undergoing routine maintenance, precisely when complaints arose, and certain names in the command always avoiding meetings related to procedural quality. 2 seemingly disconnected threads began to align in a non-random way. As the whole picture gradually became clear, they decided not to release any documents immediately. Kate analyzed that if the media flared up first, all internal links would retreat defensively. They needed the initiative. Beckham agreed. He understood the public pressure was strong, but also knew that in structural battles, persistence and timely silence were the blows that made opponents lose vigilance. Kate took the initiative to contact a former colleague at the regional FBI office who had worked with her on an internal personnel investigation. The call was encrypted, and Beckham's identity was kept confidential throughout the initial cooperation process. Thanks to that, all collected materials would hold legal weight later. Meanwhile, Beckham began reaching out to some civil rights lawyers he had cooperated with before, using independent media networks to apply pressure around the precinct but without targeting individuals directly. The goal was to make weak links in the system anxious enough to fracture from within. Kate started pinpointing those showing signs of instability inside the precinct, including Elia, who held the most important secret about the precinct's own past. They developed a dual strategy, clearly dividing each stage of action. Beckham handled public opinion, legal matters, and witness protection. Kate was responsible for internal affairs, procedures, and tactical security. The meeting ended with a brief handshake, but before leaving the room, Kate looked Beckham straight in the eye, her voice not loud but clearly articulated. "I didn't come here to calm the public. I came to fix the cracks left by those before us." The words echoed like a vow, but also a silent declaration of war against the entire system she was stepping into. Elias entered the meeting room with a face that barely hid his heaviness. In his hand was a carefully clipped stack of documents, many pages marked with red sticky notes. The white light reflected off the file covers, making the typed letters seem cold. Beckham looked at him without speaking, only nodding slightly as a signal, ready to hear what needed to be heard. "There are things I once saw but chose to ignore," Elias said in a hoarse voice. He placed the file on the table, flipping through the pages, pointing at internal complaint handling reports involving Carter. The same pattern: complaints from citizens, preliminary investigations, then disappearing at the command level. No conclusions, no prosecution. Everything vanished as if it never existed. Beckham reviewed those pages, his eyes stopping at each timestamp. Carter's case in the Westbrook area, the use of excessive force during the arrest of a student, the interference in a search warrant executed improperly, all shared one thing in common: the file never went beyond the hands of the final signatory. And in most cases, Carter was retained or promoted internally. Nelson was not frequently mentioned in the cases, but when Beckham checked personnel transfer records, he discovered something strange. A brief record showed Nelson had worked in an urban unit where a wrongful arrest led to serious injury. Only a few days later, he was transferred to a new area without any explanatory note. "They don't need him to be good," Beckham whispered. "They need him to be quiet and controllable." Meanwhile, Maya sent an email recovered from an old data chain obtained through an anonymous source. It was an exchange between Carter and a senior officer who had once held the position of regional coordinator. The content was directive, but full of implication. "If you see any sign from the response teams, deal with them harshly on the spot. They are just ink stains to be wiped clean off the lake." Beckham read that line 3 times, his eyes narrowing. "He's not giving orders," he said. "He's carrying them out." The truth gradually became clear. Carter and Nelson were not the core of the rot. They were links, surface parts, set up as supports for the decisions behind. Their loyalty did not come from ideals, but from the need to be shielded, to keep their positions, and to benefit from a system that always prioritized obedience over competence. Elias sat down, spreading then clenching his hands. He sighed. "I used to think Carter was just hot-headed," he said, "but I was wrong. He's not unconscious. He does this with consent from above, and I was silent." Beckham looked at him without judgment. "Now you're fixing that." The dialogue ended with unspoken solidarity. The three, Beckham, Elias, Maya, all understood that from this moment, what they faced was no longer 2 individuals at fault, but a stratified system where Carter and Nelson were just pawns pushed forward to shield the hands pulling the strings behind. And Elias, from a bystander, began to step fully into the center of a resistance. Silent, organized, and irreversible. On Maya's desk was a map densely pinned with red pins, each dot representing a case shelved, each connecting line a trace of hidden administrative decisions. She and Beckham sat facing each other in the closed room, the light from the laptop screen casting on their faces, leaving no room for speculation. They saw the common point: every final handling document bore the signature of Frank Daniels. The Carter transfer files that were overlooked, complaints targeting Nelson, redirected to the administrative office, a unit without authority. All 4 suppressed cases passed through Daniels' hands during his tenure as Regional Inspector General. Beckham flipped the files again, slowly pointing at each timestamp. "Nothing here is random," he said, "only deliberate choices." While the group reinforced the facts, Kate called back from a secret meeting with a former inspector who worked in internal oversight. This person asked to remain anonymous, but confirmed the disciplinary system at the station had been directly adjusted by Daniels. "We don't call it investigation," the source said. "We call it filtering, choosing which information to send out and which to keep." The list of suspended staff, for lack of clear grounds, was 3 times longer than the official report. Maya reviewed media records from the years Daniels held the administrative chief post. Alongside 2 local congressmen, Daniels appeared in federally funded community campaigns. He was awarded the Community Stability Medal after personally leading a series of patrols in low-crime areas mostly inhabited by people of color. Those campaigns now clearly revealed their nature, cleaning up the image in the media, while gradually eliminating groups likely to speak out. In internal emails, Beckham found a document marked Urgent Priority. It was a media handling guide for sensitive complaints. The wording was clear: mitigate the role of the accused individual, emphasize procedural correctness, avoid answering about personnel transfers. At the bottom, the approver was a communications officer formerly under Daniels at the old unit. They had built a shield to prevent real information from reaching the public's ears. Maya said nothing for several minutes. She only opened an audio file just sent from a trusted source. Frank Daniels' voice came through the laptop speaker, deep and controlled, in a private meeting with regional commanders. "If you need to deal with it, deal with 1 pawn. Don't let the board shake. The problem isn't the person arrested, but how we keep control." That sentence cut deep into every effort the group pursued. There was no doubt anymore Frank Daniels not only knew about the cover-up system, he was its operator. From transfer decisions, media suppression, to promoting loyal officers, every link converged on a calculated, systematized, hidden power center. Beckham looked up at Maya, then at Kate. Without lengthy discussion, the direction was clear. Their goal was no longer to expose Carter and Nelson. They would bring the one placing his hand on the chessboard, Frank Daniels, into the center of truth, where no light was dark enough to hide anything further. The night rain had just stopped, leaving the road wet and cold, with a thin mist hovering before the office window. Beckham stared intently at his phone screen, where a series of anonymous messages appeared line by line, scattered over the past 3 nights. One message repeated 3 times: "Stop before your career and your life end together." The messages had no sender number, no verifiable lead, but contained exactly the phrase that only appeared in confidential internal reports. That was enough to make Beckham hold his breath for a moment, and enough for him to know they had hit the eye of the storm. Since the day Maya was followed, she had said little. She quietly moved out of her old apartment and rented a temporary room deep in a low-profile residential area. While packing, she found wet footprints near the window, a spot she always locked but had forgotten to bolt once. That night, Maya sat before her screen for 3 hours, deleting all contacts from her main phone and transferring data to an encrypted hard drive. She was not afraid, but she understood clearly any mistake now would be enough to turn the entire process into a silent death. The server used to store the group's data was attacked 3 days later. Elias was the first to discover it when he noticed the folder containing internal records had completely disappeared. They spent nearly 4 hours restoring from an offline backup, and the files that were not deleted were harmless excerpts. The important data, related to witness identities and Frank Daniels' network, were all in the files accessed first. Beckham said only one sentence: "They have found us." At the same time, a private email from Elias was leaked on a hidden forum. The content was not incriminating, but enough to ignite speculation about Elias colluding with the media. He was immediately summoned by Internal Affairs and forced to explain activities outside his duties. Although there was no official suspension order, Elias was required to withdraw from the public investigation team and could only communicate in writing through Kate as an intermediary. He left the office with a small bag and a heavy look. Not angry, but exhausted. Beckham's mother received a call from an unknown number the next morning. The man's voice was low, deliberately measured. "You should tell your son to stay away from big matters. There are things not everyone can bear." The call ended immediately after that, but it was enough to make her sit silently in the chair all morning. She called Beckham at noon, her voice hoarse and trembling, asking only one question: "Did you do anything that made people hate you that much?" Beckham did not answer. He only heard her sigh on the other end before hanging up. The whole team began working in a tense atmosphere. Meetings were shorter, fewer people spoke up voluntarily, and all documents were passed hand to hand via hard drives instead of electronic transmission. Maya stopped coming to the office. Elias communicated indirectly. Kate increased security layers, but everyone understood this was no longer an internal investigation. Beckham sat before the information board, gripping a red pen, eyes fixed on the blank spot where the photo of the order issuer should have been. He was caught between 2 choices: continue to appear as a symbol opposing the system, or retreat into the shadows to protect those quietly holding themselves upright. And perhaps this was the moment he had to choose between victory and survival. Kate's apartment was on the top floor of a quiet building, with wide glass windows overlooking mist-covered streets. The clock on the table indicated it was late, but the light was still on, and she had not once closed her eyes. A thin stack of papers lay neatly on the desk, topped with a handwritten heading: "Resignation Letter." Next to it was a small lighter, its cap already open. Kate leaned back in the chair, eyes fixed on the paper, but her mind drifted elsewhere, to an old time never named. She remembered the investigation in Holloway District, where a young witness named Vincent held all the evidence to indict a superior officer. Vincent stood at a crossroads: speak out or run away. Kate had promised to protect him, but after only 3 days, Vincent withdrew and left behind his testimony. The case was closed, without a reason. Later, Kate was summoned to the council, where she was asked to slightly adjust the description to save a superior who was up for promotion. She refused, and in return, a disciplinary record silently followed her file for 4 years. In the years since, Kate gradually learned to keep a distance from the truth. She did not lie, but chose what to present and what to keep silent. She understood clearly how fragile the boundary was between doing right and being pushed out of the system. Now, seeing Beckham sitting before the media, before the hearing board, she could not help but feel both admiration and unease. He was doing what she once wanted, but had long given up because she knew the price to pay. Kate had never told Beckham that she believed in him, nor admitted that every time he entered the meeting room, his determined eyes and steady voice pulled her out of her neutral shell. She saw in him a copy of her former self, but an uncompromising version. That gave her both hope and a clear view of what she had left behind. That night, after rereading all the new reports from Maya and Elias, Kate sat down to write her resignation letter. The handwriting was steady, each stroke clear as a well-considered decision, but after signing, she sat motionless for an hour. During that time, the room was silent, no machine noise, no light from outside coming in. Everything froze as if waiting for a final choice. She stood up and went to the mirror. The eyes in the reflection no longer held the usual coldness, but were tired and layered with questioning. If I don't do it, then who will? If not now, then when? That question she had heard somewhere before, but now it rang like an accusation. She turned back to the desk, tore the letter into 2, then 4 pieces, finally clenching them in her hand as if ripping away a part of the person who once chose to stand still. When she released her grip, the fragments fell to the floor, slowly and silently. She knew this would not protect her. She also knew from this moment forward what remained ahead could only be moving forward. But that was her final decision that night, and the beginning of a new choice, to fight to the end, even if it meant sacrificing all she had accumulated over a lifetime in the field, not for Beckham, but for the version of herself who had once been knocked down and never stood up again. Within a single night, Beckham's testimony at the hearing flooded every corner of social media. A still image of him standing tall in the chamber, calm yet resolute, was turned into a poster overlaid with the words, "We will not stay silent," and spread at lightning speed. The largest video platform logged more than 3 million views in 12 hours, while related hashtags climbed to the top of the trending list. Maya did not pause. She published the first investigative article in a major outlet special features section. Its title, sharp as a blade, "When a Gaze Becomes a Crime." The piece recounted the entire hearing, unearthed files once buried, and connected them to similar incidents under the same command structure. National television networks quickly joined in, interviewing witnesses, inviting Beckham's legal counsel to live panels. The ripple effect reached beyond the region, touching an audience that had long remained indifferent. Public opinion is split into 2 clear camps. One side hailed Beckham as a new symbol of peaceful resistance, organizing marches in multiple cities, lighting candles outside police headquarters, and holding placards that read, "The system must be cleansed. No more cover-ups." The other side questioned his true motives, accusing Beckham of exploiting the media to manipulate emotions and sow division. On social platforms, spliced clips began to circulate, deliberately diluting the core message and casting doubt on the objectivity of the entire affair. Civil rights organizations raised their voices. The ACLU issued a statement demanding that the investigation expand to the federal level, stressing the systemic nature of the violations. The NAACP provided legal support to Black witnesses who had been unlawfully detained. Independent activist groups shared additional archival files gathered over many years, creating a broad and credible web of evidence. In minority communities, the mood shifted from silence to vigilance, then surged into a wave of organization and response. Pressure converged on the police force itself. Some younger officers filed for transfers, fearful of being drawn into political factions. Those once neutral were forced to choose sides, causing sharp polarization within departments. In private chat groups, many conversations revolved around a single question: is any of this truly random? Local news stations, long cautious, also entered the fray. They dug into cases left dormant for years, seeking intersections among incidents that had seemed unrelated. Names once buried in internal reports resurfaced, this time no longer relegated to oblivion. Amid the surge, Beckham's team recognized two truths. Media could be a double-edged sword, and they needed irrefutable proof, something that would strike directly at the center of Frank Daniels' power. Maya had already begun the search. A police department spokesperson faced a row of microphones at a brief press conference, his tone steady as he navigated the rising media tide. Any misconduct, if confirmed, will be addressed through proper internal procedures. We do not operate on the whims of the crowd. Under the lights, the statement served both as reassurance and as a reminder that the system, not public pressure, would decide the outcome. The message was crafted carefully, avoiding any specific names, including that of Frank Daniels, now at the heart of the allegations. This evasiveness frustrated several reporters, but the department deftly shifted focus by emphasizing its commitment to maintaining a professional image and protecting law enforcement personnel from unverified accusations. Within the command ranks, cracks began to show. Certain district leaders issued neutral remarks, steering clear of the case itself and instead speaking of rebuilding trust and possible margins of error in a large system. A proposal to reform internal reporting procedures surfaced as a gesture to placate the public, but it still left untouched the core question of Frank Daniels' authority. A local television station, Frank Daniels appeared in a one-on-one interview. Seated opposite the host, he denied all allegations, calling them a conspiracy fueled by politically motivated actors. His face remained stern, yet his words struck back. We are witnessing an effort to dismantle the system from within. Do not let emotion override the law. Simultaneously, subtle defensive maneuvers unfolded. The department's media unit began refusing further press questions, citing the need for additional time to verify internal records. Social media accounts linked to high-ranking officers were abruptly switched to private. Posts mentioning Frank Daniels vanished without explanation. Media watch groups labeled this the information gate phase, a damage control strategy of delayed responses. Although public sentiment outside swung heavily toward justice, the internal apparatus maintained control over official information streams. The sophistication of its defensive tactics, coupled with tight coordination between communications staff and administrative leaders, made penetration increasingly difficult. In their workspace, Beckham, Maya, and Kate watched a constant stream of news reports, their expressions growing heavier. They understood one thing clearly. To shatter the protective shell around Frank Daniels, they needed a truly decisive blow, a witness who could not be discredited, evidence that could not be erased. The battle was far from over, and time was not on their side. The data archive was located in the basement of the old technical area, a place most current law enforcement units had either forgotten or deliberately excluded from any maintenance plans. Elias used a temporary access card, granted under the pretext of checking for system synchronization errors, a task few paid attention to. He walked past shelves filled with outdated equipment, cables covered in dust, and stopped in front of a server that had not been dismantled, still connected internally. The boot-up screen emitted a pale light, accompanied by a series of error warnings. It was precisely this antiquity that made Elias more certain this place was considered forgotten. He found a series of emails saved in an old format, simply encrypted but voluminous. Among them, an internal memo appeared on the screen that made Elias pause. It was a recording of a high-level meeting among officers where Frank Daniels, then a regional commander, used the phrase, "put that case on hold, prioritize stability first," to implicitly order the halt of the investigation into the abuse of a young black man the previous year. Additionally, Elias discovered at least 3 arrest records showing signs of tampering, original names changed, initial behavioral descriptions blurred, replaced with vague phrases such as disturbing public order or non-cooperative behavior. He plugged in a mini backup device, recording the entire content, while simultaneously using a hidden camera to film his actions, a precaution in case the data was deleted. While capturing the documents, Elias heard footsteps echoing from the corridor above. This system was supposed to be out of service, with no assigned shifts during this time. He immediately turned off the screen, unplugged the device, and exited the storage room through a side door leading to the parking lot behind. A few minutes later, Elias called a middle-aged man living in an old nearby apartment complex, an IT technician named Clay Morris. Clay was once the head of the police department's internal IT team, but was demoted after protesting against an unauthorized data deletion. Since leaving, he lived discreetly, repairing computers as a freelancer. Elias brought the data files to Clay. After a few commands, Clay recognized the tampered files, most of which were encrypted using an internal tool only a few top-level managers had access to. Clay nodded. No civilian could have touched this. This must have come from the inside room. That night, Elias left Clay's house through the back way. When he stopped at a grocery store, a gray SUV with no license plate silently passed by. No sirens, no rush, but enough for Elias to recognize it had appeared 3 times near his residence in the past week. His instinct warned him this was no ordinary surveillance. That very night, Elias packed essential belongings and left his rented apartment. He chose a motel over 10 miles away from the city, registering under a false identity. Before turning off his phone, Elias sent an encrypted message to Beckham. "I have what you need, but it will take more than a single USB." Then he placed a recording device by the window and sat silently on the bed, waiting for dawn. The warehouse stood behind an old gas station, its corrugated roof dented by time, once used to hide equipment when Beckham was on special duty locally. No cameras, no passersby, only a thin layer of dust and light filtering through gaps in the rotten wooden walls. Elias arrived first, sitting quietly on a tarp-covered crate, his backpack beside him as if holding an entire battle. When Beckham pushed open the door and stepped inside, they did not shake hands or exchange greetings. Only a look was shared, enough to understand the situation had gone beyond ordinary limits. Elias opened the backpack, taking out 3 portable hard drives wrapped carefully in antiseptic fabric. Each device was labeled separately, accompanied by a neatly handwritten, detailed decoding guide. He pushed them toward Beckham and said in a low, unwavering voice, 3 copies. Each is enough for a federal court to hold a separate hearing. I'm not sure I'll keep them intact if I carry them too long. Beckham sat down, opened one hard drive, and plugged it into an offline laptop. The audio recordings gradually appeared, voices echoing through the empty room. One segment showed Frank Daniels halting an internal investigation due to risks affecting reputation. Another segment featured a mid-level officer discussing with command about scrubbing records of a wrongful arrest. Beckham flipped quickly through lines, hand on the mouse, but eyes fixed on the screen. After a while, he closed the laptop and looked up at Elias. "This is not just evidence. It's the body of the system itself, and we're dissecting it." They moved on to planning. Beckham outlined a clear 3-layer strategy. One part of the data would be handed to Marvin for integration into the official legal records. This portion was encoded according to judicial standards, ensuring admissibility in court. In the second part, Maya would be asked to prepare a media campaign. The last part, Beckham kept special, USB wrapped in a fireproof bag, which would not appear anywhere unless the opponent struck first. Elias nodded, eyes fixed on the strategic map. After all, he still held the role of gatekeeper, ensuring every retreat path was safe. Beckham turned, voice low. "They have power, we have the truth. Just don't drop it at the final step." The words were not a rallying cry, but the crystallization of months spent under surveillance, pressure, and silent resistance. Before leaving, Elias used a portable encryption device to restructure the entire internal communication system. Each team member received a unique key, linked to a temporary identifier. From now until the hearing, All communication channels would be routed through triple-layer security. Kate was assigned to audit every data packet, verify sources, and avoid counterattacks from the opponent. The last moments in the warehouse passed silently. Elias placed a hand on Beckham's shoulder, a light squeeze as a pledge. No promises were made, no further plans needed. Through the cracks in the wall, a thin beam of light shone directly on the USB in Beckham's hand. In that light, they saw not data, but hope. Fragile, yet strong enough to pierce through a system that had been blind for too long. News about the hearing spread like a thick smoke, engulfing the atmosphere at the Ridgepoint Police Headquarters. In the corridors, once familiar with the rhythm of strict orders and silent routines, there now appeared evasive glances and whispered words laden with implication. The internal unity began to fracture. No one dared to call this place united anymore. The conservative faction tightly held on to the old model, mostly veteran officers who had risen under the direct or indirect support of Frank Daniels. To them, the ongoing upheaval was seen as a media frenzy, the result of a politicization campaign of the system. They held secret meetings, maintained strict communication, tacitly agreeing not to disclose anything outside, not even to colleagues. In the brief shift meetings, phrases like, "Don't let the press lead us by the nose," became their oral motto. Opposing them were the younger officers, many of whom had previously been neutral or even bowed to wrongful orders. But since the widely circulated footage of Beckham's arbitrary arrest, many had awakened. This group began discussing disciplinary procedures, directly questioning superiors, and demanding to review previously concealed records. Some quietly submitted proposals for internal reform, something they had once considered impossible. Tensions escalated. In the break room, even casual questions like, "What's your shift time?" could be interpreted as probing. During joint shifts, some no longer wished to cooperate. A young officer was labeled a traitor after publicly supporting Beckham's speech. During a night patrol, this officer was deliberately left behind alone at a scene for several minutes without explanation. This movement did not stop within the force. Outside, the public began voicing concerns about the absence of police presence when called. A petty theft in the eastern residential area was reported in the news due to the long wait for police backup. Small incidents like these, once handled swiftly, were now neglected due to internal turmoil. Local media seized the opportunity, producing a series of reports highlighting the decline in law enforcement effectiveness. Caught in the tension's eye was the neutral group, those who had thought they could remain silent and survive. Now they were questioned from both sides, forced to choose or at least reveal their stance. A senior lieutenant was bluntly asked by subordinates, "Are you standing for justice or behind Frank Daniels?" The question had no answer, but the slow nod that followed was enough to change the entire room's attitude. That silent fracture could no longer be hidden. It was becoming a battlefield, where each soldier had to decide who they were fighting for and why. The small meeting room on the top floor of the coordination office was chosen as the strategic base. Beckham spread a data connection map on the table while Kate and Elias sat opposite, their eyes fixed on the chain of names and timestamps gradually forming a structure. Through hundreds of stored files, emails, and backups recovered from previous cyber attacks, they recognized an undeniable fact. Frank Daniels still controlled most of the system, and without breaking that shell, every effort would be stopped before the next hearing. Beckham spoke first. "We can't attack individual cases one by one. His operation is structural. Verbal orders, report tampering, unauthorized personnel transfers. If we focus on specific mistakes, he'll escape again with technicalities or collective responsibility." Kate nodded, her gaze resting on the chain of officers who had been transferred. She had once been part of that system and understood well how it used the name of internal compliance to bury the truth. Maya joined remotely via encrypted call. Her voice was clear and fast, carrying tension. "I have a list of 5 people who worked directly under Daniels but have since transferred or were forced to resign for unclear reasons. If approached correctly, at least two might speak up. Elias looked at Beckham, signaling agreement. Those living witnesses would be the key links, proving that the cover-up model was not just a hypothesis, but a deliberately executed system. Kate proposed a different approach, an inside approach. She recalled a county lieutenant who had opposed Daniels in a secret meeting years ago. That man was later demoted and transferred due to health reasons. She secretly contacted him again, messaging from a secure phone number. I need him to share what he once saw, not to accuse, but to reconstruct the system's nature. Beckham was silent for a few seconds, then softly said, Sometimes old fragments are what make the wall collapse. The strategy was gradually formed. On one side was the legal team, gathering hard data, organizing files systematically to prepare for a counterattack at the hearing. On the other was the strategic communications team, led by Maya, ready to release guided evidence if blocked by the oversight board or invisible hands. They called it a double strike, one legal, one public influence. At the core of the entire plan was not the old legal question. Beckham emphasized to the group, the question is not whether Daniels broke the law. The question is, how many layers did he manipulate, for how long, and who assisted? If we answer that, we don't take down one man, we dismantle the entire machine. Silence filled the room for a few beats, before everyone nodded in turn. The fight was no longer about right or wrong. It was a battle to restore faith in what should have existed from the start. After the incident was exposed and public pressure grew increasingly intense, Carter and Nelson clearly felt their positions seriously shaken. They refused to accept defeat easily and quickly began planning a counterattack, determined to maintain their power and personal reputation. In the following days, they focused on building alliances with conservative colleagues within the police station, those who stubbornly defended the old system where power was preserved at all costs. Carter, with his decisive and ambitious nature, swiftly exploited internal media channels to spread distorted information aimed at undermining Beckham and his supporters' credibility. These insinuations, sometimes mere rumors, were enough to sow doubt among many other colleagues. He also lobbied influential figures in the police station to indirectly pressure management levels, slowing the investigation process and sabotaging Beckham's image in the media. Meanwhile, Nelson played a quieter but equally important role. He concentrated on collecting sensitive personal information about Beckham, seeking weaknesses to threaten, or at least apply psychological pressure. Small details about Beckham's private life and personal relationships were used by Nelson as a covert weapon to destabilize Beckham's focus on work. With an indifferent and cold gaze, Nelson closely tracked Beckham's every step, always ready to exploit any mistakes if they appeared. The confrontation unfolded not only on the media front or in secret exchanges, but also permeated every corner of the police station. Internal meetings became more tense than ever, with factions sharply divided. Silent clashes, hateful looks, and even discreet warnings created a suffocating and risky atmosphere. Everyone had to choose a side, while trust and unity gradually eroded. These deep conflicts made the work environment unbearable, and work interactions became cold and stressful. Carter and Nelson spared no effort to maintain control, from manipulating information to fabricating negative stories about Beckham to divide his allies. Their fierce resistance and scheming forced Beckham to face pressure not only externally, but also be vigilant against traitors within the ranks. At this time, Carter showed increased aggressiveness, always displaying a challenging attitude when confronting Beckham or his close associates directly. He sought every way to prove Beckham was merely a troublemaker, untrustworthy, and undeserving of being heard. Nelson, though seldom showing emotion, also appeared firm in defending his colleague, joining Carter in intensifying tactics to weaken Beckham's morale and reputation. Under growing pressure, Beckham's steadfastness and calmness became a major challenge for them. Every counterattack was met with sharp and clear-headed responses, making Carter and Nelson feel more frustrated and stuck. However, deep inside, they still harbored an unyielding will, ready to use any means to achieve their goals. This conflict was not simply a personal dispute, but part of a power struggle within the police station, where justice and truth were threatened by schemes and personal interests. The fierce counterattack from Carter and Nelson also signaled that factional conflicts would become even more tense and complex, opening up huge challenges ahead for Beckham and his team, requiring high alertness and uncompromising determination. Since the incident became a media focal point, Beckham Brooks's life no longer had a truly peaceful moment. Every step, every decision, every word carried weight from two sides. One was professional duty, the other silent pressure from family, those who did not choose the path of fighting but bore its consequences. Even evenings back home, warm lights and quiet in his apartment were not enough to soothe his tense mind as the tightening attacks closed in. His family started to feel clearly worried. His mother, who always closely followed every step of her son, texted nightly with brief but anxious lines. His sister, living in another state, called more often, questioning his safety and whether what he was doing was worth risking both career and personal life. Their eyes held no blame, but were full of fear. The hardest thing for Beckham was that he could not reassure them with a definite promise. He knew everything had only just begun, and he could not guarantee he would always hold the initiative in this complex battle. Family pressure caused many sleepless nights. Conflicting thoughts crept in relentlessly. He once thought he was used to working under pressure, but when hidden threats appeared and strange figures showed up near relatives' homes, Beckham realized how fragile the line between justice and danger was. He became more cautious in every action, call, and meeting. His personal life was put on the scale, and the price for each step was no longer theoretical. At the same time, the workload at the office increased. The cases he and Kate investigated involved more senior officers than initially expected. Elias moved to the Internal Affairs office, but kept in touch, reporting information he collected from inside. However, the fact that someone on the team was monitored and recorded during secret meetings confirmed the undeniable presence of a traitor. Beckham realized he worked in an environment where any lack of vigilance could be exploited to strike back. Not only did he have to maintain legal reasoning and strategies against Carter and the conservative group's attacks, but Beckham also had to refine every detail in reports and evidence before publishing, ensuring maximum persuasiveness. He coordinated continuously with Kate and Maya, holding short meetings at the start and end of workdays to update developments. Though exhausted, Beckham kept a strict discipline at work because he understood that a small crack could collapse all accumulated efforts. But the hardest challenge did not come from outside. What weighed most heavily on Beckham was beginning to doubt his emotional control over his emotions. Sometimes in meetings, when faced with a challenging look or a defamatory remark, he had to take several seconds to suppress an impulsive reaction. That had never happened before. He had been very confident in his composure, but now constant strikes from behind forced him to question what was truly his limit. One afternoon, standing on the rooftop of the office building, looking down at the bustling crowd and the last sunlight pouring on the road, Beckham was silent for a long time. That light did not dispel fatigue, but also did not let darkness completely take over his thoughts. He knew what burden he carried, and clearly understood that if he stopped, many people would lose the chance to hear the truth. Pressure did not weaken him, but made every step heavier and clearer. Beckham turned back inside, walked straight to his desk, and reopened Frank Daniels's file. His eyes stopped at a small note left by Elias, underlining a related figure's name never before mentioned. He looked up, his gaze regaining its usual sharpness. This battle was still long, and he was still standing strong enough to bring everything to light. The meeting room, located in the basement of a nearly forgotten private library, was dimly lit by a dusty, round bulb that barely illuminated a long wooden table and 4 worn chairs. Beckham was the last to arrive, carrying a thick dossier, his face tense but eyes steady. In that room, every sound became clear, from the soft tapping of a pen on the table to the measured breaths of those present. This was no ordinary meeting. Everyone understood that decisions made here would affect the entire situation. Kate sat to Beckham's left, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the dossier he had just placed down. Across from them, Alias remained silent as usual, but his eyes betrayed a brewing urgency. Maya checked the recording device in the corner, then glanced at everyone and nodded slightly to confirm no electronic interference. Beside her sat an older man with graying hair, wearing a light gray suit, Marvin Leong, an internal affairs litigation lawyer and strategic advisor to a federal police oversight organization. Beckham opened the dossier and pulled out several marked documents. No one needed to prompt. Elias knew which one was his and quickly produced a copy of an internal email deleted from administrative records days after the arrest. Marvin leaned in to examine it carefully, nodding with grave seriousness. Maya continued with a data analysis report showing the original video had surpassed 500,000 views and shares. She also reported that 5 human rights organizations had contacted her directly to verify the clip's authenticity. "We are at a tipping point," she said. "Either we expose them, or everything will be buried under a fierce..." Kate presented a thin document, an internal HR memo revealing administrative interference with arrest procedure violation records over the past 3 years, many involving officers protected by Frank Daniels. Beckham listened without interruption, his eyes scanning subtle expressions on his teammates' faces. For him, trust in the right people mattered more than evidence alone, and those present in this room were chosen not by familiarity, but by courage. Marvin spoke last, his tone low but forceful. "To take down someone like Daniels, you must prove the system has been manipulated for personal gain. Not just procedural violations, but power used to silence, falsify records, and stifle investigation." He paused, looking directly at Beckham. "This hearing isn't about right or wrong. It's the one chance to lay out a truth the public can see and believe through facts. If we miss it, they will cover every lead." Beckham nodded slightly. He knew this better than anyone. He had witnessed too many investigations quietly shut down, files deleted, voices silenced by disappearance. But this time was different. He was not alone. Elias leaned forward, placing an additional file on the table. "An internal staff member from the technical department wants to speak directly. They were ordered by Daniels to handle detention area camera data and suspect edits. I can arrange for them to appear at the hearing, but absolute anonymity must be guaranteed." Kate quickly took notes and nodded in agreement. The table's light cast shadows on each face, emphasizing a mix of determination and worry. No one spoke further because they all understood. Words were no longer enough. Only action and evidence could bring justice to light. Beckham tightened his grip on the dossier and stood first. The door opened quietly, as if the group was stepping into a deeper layer, where the line between truth and falsehood, power and reality, was no longer as clear as they once believed. Everyone returned to the table, their eyes less tense but more focused. The meeting shifted to its most crucial phase. Marvin opened a brown folder and pulled out a clearly printed strategic plan, quickly scanning before sliding it toward Kate. "This hearing isn't negotiable," he said firmly. "It's our only chance to end the internal cover-up system. We need 3 things: irrefutable evidence, control over timing, and simultaneous media pressure." Kate took the paper, reading every line. Her task was to verify and cross-check all procedural violations, especially the rules deliberately omitted in internal case handling. She underlined key points mostly related to the timing of Beckham's case and signs of command-level interference. In her notebook, she had a timeline and the names of responsible personnel. The critical task was to turn these fragments into a coherent structure that could withstand scrutiny. Elias held a USB containing internal officer communications recorded from an old device in the control room. He had verified the file's integrity to ensure no edits. He was also reaching out to a technician, willing to testify if protected. He would handle direct contact, keeping the identity strictly confidential to avoid pressure or covert attacks. Maya was updating the latest article on her laptop, She planned to release the previously unpublished video and a long report citing legal documents and internal police policy analysis hours before the hearing. The goal was to hit public sentiment directly, forcing mainstream media to report before any cover-up. Timing was crucial, and Maya knew that staying half a step ahead would secure their advantage until the hearing started. Marvin continued preparing Beckham's testimony draft. The content was brief but sharp, outlining 3 core points. First, evidence removal from the system and who authorized it. Second, verbal orders from Frank Daniels, blocking Elias's data access. Third, a series of arrests targeting people of color with clear bias, shielded by opaque internal provisions. Marvin would guide the hearing to prosecute organizational misconduct rather than singling out individuals, preventing Daniels from evading responsibility by shifting blame downwards. Kate requested all data be encrypted into 2 copies, one online via a secure network, one offline divided into 3 USB drives, sent to 3 independent parties. Each was tagged with a unique ID to avoid mix-ups or swaps. Elias was responsible for distribution before the group moved to the main hearing location. Maya gave Beckham a final reminder in a low but clear voice. "They will provoke you. Maybe right there, maybe before the media. They'll reenact events, distort context, and try to unnerve you." Beckham nodded, expression unreadable. But in his mind, he had rehearsed it hundreds of times. He understood his role and what would break if he lost control. Marvin packed up the papers, closing the dossier. No one spoke further. They exchanged looks. Words unnecessary, all shared the same resolve. Beckham was the first to stand, clutching the thick folder to his chest. The door opened, casting a narrow but distinct corridor light that threw their shadows on the wall, as if they were stepping toward a front line with no certainty of who they would be afterward. But everyone knew one thing: retreat was no longer an option. Kate's computer emitted a sharp, brief alert tone that cut through the meeting room, causing everyone to stop immediately. On the screen appeared a warning of unauthorized access to one of the 3 previously distributed data copies. The system clock recorded the access time less than 10 minutes after the last USB was handed over. Without further words, all eyes turned to Elias. Elias stood up, quickly typing to trace the distribution route of each copy. The first 2 were intact and well controlled, but the third, held by Ryan Coyle, Marvin's close assistant, showed abnormal traces. The connection originated from a fake network address, routed indirectly through a media server linked to a conservative activist group. Maya frowned as she saw the IP address, rapidly cross-checking, then spoke in a lowered voice. "The access time coincides exactly with when he asked to step out for a personal call." Marvin pushed back his chair and stood, his face coldly composed. Beckham was silent for a few seconds, hands still on the half-read file. He looked at Kate and whispered, "We need to verify before jumping to conclusions." But Kate gave a curt order: "Contact him immediately." Ryan's phone was completely off. Messages went unanswered. His work account had logged out over an hour earlier. Meanwhile, Maya discovered the group's database access control account had been altered, something only possible with the secondary admin rights Marvin had given Ryan from the start. Elias switched to internal channels, using his system monitoring privileges to track Ryan's recent queries. A series of simply encrypted emails appeared, sent a few days ago to an address belonging to a former administrative assistant for Frank Daniels. The content was indirect, only brief code lines like G3 ready, Channel B confirmed, maintain old travel schedule. Enough to paint a covert picture where prior agreements had been made. The atmosphere in the room thickened heavily. Marvin sat down, sweat beading on his forehead. His whole life he had chosen trusted people, never doubted Ryan, a man he had vouched for in 3 major investigations, a longtime deskmate. Beckham said nothing more, eyes fixed on the wall where the small clock ticked evenly. The silence was no longer uncertainty, but anger held tightly inside. Maya sat down on the floor, laptop open, typing a brief internal note. Urgent, confirmed internal betrayal. Serious leak level. Elias silently added a third encryption layer to the backup system. Kate grabbed her phone, calling the digital security unit to block all secondary access rights for 2 hours. No one needed to say what was obvious. Ryan had sold information in exchange for a prosecutor position on the State Oversight Council, where people like Frank Daniels tried to maintain influence. The betrayal was not only a fatal blow to trust, but a deadly vulnerability before crucial decisions. Kate clenched her fist, eyes glued to the screen. "The issue is no longer leaked data," she said, "but now we must change how we enter the hearing, from defense to confrontation." Elias nodded. Beckham rose calmly, took the documents, and looked toward the slightly open door. Outside was a long hallway, at the end of which awaited a battle they could no longer afford to lose. Marvin slammed his laptop shut, hands clenched into fists. He ordered complete isolation of the data system, including all external copies. Elias immediately executed the command, accessing the central encryption system to disable all secondary accesses. Simultaneously, Marvin contacted 2 independent storage units established at the campaign's start, requesting full verification of the data structure to ensure no swaps occurred before Ryan's betrayal was detected. Maya did not wait for orders. She opened a second laptop, connecting to a portable hard drive hidden in her coat lining. This was a personal copy she had created during the final night's work, never transmitted over any internal network. The data was checked line by line for identifiers, completely intact. Meanwhile, Elias set up a temporary group communication system via an external server to avoid ongoing monitoring through the old line Ryan had accessed. No one spoke of Ryan anymore, but everyone felt the void he left. Beckham leaned against the table, eyes staring into a dark corner where the ceiling lights did not reach. His face showed no emotion, but the atmosphere seemed to shift with the tension in his gaze. He had believed every loophole was locked tight. This betrayal was more than data loss. It was a crack in trust at the most dangerous moment. Kate took up the task list, calling an urgent meeting with the core team. No delay, no absence. The 4 returned to the conference table as if never leaving. All expressions had changed. No room for hesitation. Elias proposed an urgent plan. The person carrying the original file to the hearing could no longer be any third party but Beckham. Besides Marvin, he was the only one deeply understanding the content's structure and capable of handling confrontations on set. Kate agreed without further questions. Maya sat upright, flipping the prepared media dossier aside. Ryan may have given a copy to Daniels. That means they already know what we plan to say and do and will exploit every loophole to manipulate the hearing. The atmosphere thickened. Marvin folded his arms, thought for a few seconds, then decided the original media plan was canceled. All focus would be on legal defense, testimonies, and on-the-spot rebuttals. Maya reacted quickly, nodding, then proposed a backup plan. Release a key video clip exactly midway through the hearing. She did not specify, but her eyes showed it was the final strike that could change everything. No one mentioned failure or possible consequences anymore. All understood, once inside the game, there was no turning back. Kate laid out the evacuation route and safe withdrawal schedule, her hand lightly brushing over each marked point. Maya double-checked all transmission equipment. Marvin called in 2 junior lawyers for independent oversight. Elias locked the encryption system he had just set up, his gaze more serious than ever. Beckham stood straight, holding the file tightly, then looked at Kate. This time his eyes held not anger, but absolute focus. The door closed behind them, silently. No farewells, no reminders. Before leaving the table, Kate squeezed Beckham's hand gently, her low but firm words for him. "We let one person slip through. Don't let the whole system fall." Beckham nodded, and in that glance, for the first time since the start, there was a spark, like a blade drawn from its sheath, not to threaten, but to end. Conservative news outlets began to flood social media timelines with sensational headlines. Black lawyer once suspended by internal investigation, and female journalist violated professional ethics appeared repeatedly, targeting Beckham and Maya directly. The article's contents were not new, mostly based on old events long since cleared or resolved, but rearranged and sensationalized with clear intent. Some channels used doctored images, added unverified quotes, pushing public opinion into uncertainty. Beckham's past case from his time in the Civil Justice Department was resurrected, a delayed judgment due to lack of evidence, though later resolved legally. The story was painted as a breach of public duty ethics, casting doubt on his career transparency. Meanwhile, Maya was targeted with leaked private photos, including family images and information about her high school-age younger brother, all wrapped in articles titled Exploring the Background of the Whistleblower. Pressure extended beyond the media. Some lawmakers called to postpone the hearing, citing national security threats due to spreading unverified information. A media sponsor who had collaborated with Maya on human rights projects withdrew support, directly harming the independent distribution channel she and her team operated. Signs of fractures appeared internally as well. 2 associates from Marvin's legal support team withdrew from the hearing, citing family safety concerns. Marvin received an anonymous white paper letter with no sender's name, bearing a simple cutout phrase from a newspaper. "The further you go, the more you risk losing honor." He did not show it to anyone, but asked Elias to check for fingerprints and smell. In an urgent night meeting, Elias proposed upgrading the security system by stratifying data access, assigning permissions per session. He also suggested using dedicated encrypted communication channels among key members, avoiding all email and personal phone contact. Standing before a whiteboard, Kate circled newly exposed vulnerabilities in red ink, reassessing the entire media plan. She instructed Maya to review the document release schedule and narrow down the circle of trusted journalists. No one appeared panicked, but each face showed the gravity of the underlying wave. Beckham remained silent throughout the meeting. He neither rebutted nor demanded immediate media responses. His only gesture was leaning back in his chair, eyes fixed on the city map on the wall, as if reading something beyond the data. Each mention of Daniels or the shadowy system behind it deepened the intensity in his gaze. He did not resist, but every breath carried cold determination. When the group briefly broke, Maya stayed alone before her laptop screen. The draft statement she was preparing used official language but covertly embedded a clear message. Those engineering this wave of public opinion were repeating old tactics, using media to impose truth. Maya knew this piece would not be published immediately. It was the last bullet, reserved for when the opposing side thought all counterattacks were extinguished and she would be the one holding the trigger tight. Beckham closed the file folder as he received an encrypted message from an FBI contact. The internal report confirmed the presence of an unofficial surveillance group, previously noted near police investigations. The source said the group was linked to several former officers from Daniels' unit, now retired but maintaining their own network. Alarmingly, the group had participated in at least 2 past witness intimidation cases, and now Beckham was at the center of attention. At the same time, returning from a meeting with an independent press organization, Maya noticed a motorbike tailing closely beside her vehicle over a long stretch. The rider wore a helmet, face covered, keeping just enough distance to avoid collision, but constantly visible in her rearview mirror. She stopped at 3 locations. The rider silently followed. Only when turning sharply into a secured parking lot did the other bike disappear. Kate convened a brief meeting without waiting for others' opinions. She ordered the entire team relocated to a high-security hotel with a private basement and double-layered security checks. The real names of all members were removed from the booking system, replaced by randomly coded nicknames. All travel schedules were coordinated through 2 intermediaries outside the team to reduce surveillance risks. Beckham reset his personal surveillance devices, a set of thermal sensors and location signals used exclusively in federal operations. This system did not connect to local police, but operated independently on internal frequencies. He activated cross-tacking mode, linking with Maya's device, allowing both to receive alerts immediately upon unusual monitoring. They no longer trusted any regular procedure to protect themselves. Before nightfall, Maya sent 2 backup data sets to 2 international journalists in Europe and Canada. She clearly noted, If no safety confirmation was received within 48 hours, they had the right to publish all contents with legal evidence attached. Beckham also sent an encrypted letter to an independent legal unit in Washington, where he'd trained hearing strategies. If isolated from the hearing, that team would take full control of the case files with ultimate access rights. Pressure began to visibly affect Maya. While checking equipment, she mistakenly pulled the wrong memory card, dropping 2 file folders and hurriedly bending to retrieve them. Elias glanced over but said nothing. Maya quickly regained composure. Her face turned cold again, but Beckham noticed her eyes no longer held their initial certainty. He stepped forward, gently touched her shoulder, voice dropping. "If they're this scared, it means we've hit the right wound." Maya said nothing, only nodded. That brief moment was enough for both to understand their bond was no longer just duty. As darkness fell, 2 small suitcases, tightly packed with documents, left the old temporary apartment. Maya carried the laptop, Beckham the surveillance equipment bag, stepping into an unmarked car waiting outside. Streetlights swept across the window, casting short streaks of light on their faces. Neither spoke throughout the journey. The engine hummed softly through the quiet neighborhood, but in their minds every fact, every threat, every gap yet to be filled appeared sharply. Everything was no longer an investigative plan, but a survival equation. Every decision had to be linked with an exit strategy. Every conversation had to be encrypted by willpower, and every step carried the possibility of a final tie. The basement of an abandoned building behind the old office complex was used as a secret meeting place for Beckham's group. No nameplates, no signs, but inside was a temporary command center. A long table was covered with files, audio recordings, laptops, and photos clipped by case. Beckham stood at the head of the table, his eyes scanning every detail. His face was calm, but every movement showed intense concentration. Elias was communicating with a former officer who had been transferred after refusing to falsify internal reports. This person had never spoken publicly, but had privately shared with Elias incidents related to Carter and the higher-ups. Meanwhile, Kate reviewed the list of witnesses present on the day Beckham was arrested. Some had left the city, others hesitated. She needed to ensure they were ready to testify without influence or threat. Maya Collins, skilled in gathering and verifying information, moved between separate meeting points to receive classified documents from anonymous sources. In her bag was a hard drive containing internal audio recordings, copies of neglected internal investigation reports, and a video capturing a secret meeting between senior officers and Frank Daniel, where they discussed how to control the media after Beckham's arrest. Every piece of data Maya brought back was cross-sectored, encrypted, and stored on a secure server. Amid the dense data atmosphere, the group uncovered another crucial link. An officer who was a former classmate of Carter, now holding a senior coordination position in a neighboring district. This person had been involved in a case of evidence tampering to protect a colleague. Beckham quietly took notes, adding this name to the people to be questioned list. The network they faced was no longer a few individuals abusing power, but a tangled system with links distributed across levels of authority. As the volume of documents grew, so did the pressure. Some witnesses faced difficulties, even receiving veiled threats via phone. Elias, once part of the system, understood that the tactics would escalate if they got closer to the truth. Beckham did not shy away. He adjusted the investigation's direction, placing some witnesses under anonymous protection. He also planned to question mid-level targets, the spots most vulnerable to exposure. Kate was responsible for coordinating with an independent legal team, assessing the overall strategy and allocating questions by impact level. She set principles, focus on organized chains of behavior, avoid emotional pitfalls, and expose the power structure from the bottom up. While everyone took a short break, Beckham sat before the screen, editing documents and writing key legal questions by hand, every word targeting truth and the potential for counterattack. Though unspoken, everyone's eyes in the room shared one understanding. The hearing was not only to defend personal honor, but a rare chance to expose a long-standing, corrupt machine no one dared to name. In a small consultation room behind the record storage area, Beckham sat opposite Kate and Elias. On the table lay a draft testimony, heavily marked with underlines, circles, and handwritten notes in red ink. The space was silent. Each person read and considered every word, as if one wrong choice could let all their efforts slip away. Beckham began practicing his testimony based on his experience, but kept emotions from overwhelming reason. Each segment was written with logical flow, from the initial encounter, the arrest process, the attitudes of the two officers, to the misconduct inside the precinct. He did not need to exaggerate. The facts were serious enough to serve as evidence. However, for the hearing to carry weight, the testimony required more than truth. It needed structure, tone, and resolve. Kate took the role of the challenger. She was relentless. Sharp, sometimes aggressive questions were continuously posed to test Beckham's reactions. How did you respond when they didn't provide an official reason? Did you show any defiance that made them feel threatened? Each question forced Beckham to adjust his delivery, avoiding defensiveness while maintaining the strength of his stance. Elias took notes, marking points prone to misinterpretation to prevent distortion in the real hearing. A simulation was set up. They imagined the presence of police representatives, prosecutors, lawyers, and media. Beckham delivered an opening statement, with Kate and Elias alternating roles as prosecutors and reporters. The exercise was not mere practice, it was a real examination. Beckham learned to control his gaze, breathing, and pauses. Every stop has deep purpose. Every direct look made an impact. However, practicing testimony was not everything. The legal strategy was the deeper layer deciding the outcome. Kate, an independent legal team, and Elias devised responses for unexpected scenarios. They prepared 3 levels of reactions: evidence rejection, witness dismissal, and personal attacks. For each, the team had ready responses. From counter-arguments to steering attention to the systemic evidence chain, they prioritized a tight structure, opening with specific misconduct, focusing on systemic manipulation, and concluding with social consequences, so the review board could not ignore it. Beckham kept refining. He learned to emphasize when denied the right to explanation. When handcuffed on the street, he chose a deep, firm voice when mentioning other victims crushed by the system. In silence, he did not stand to recount a single event, but to represent hundreds of untold stories before the court. Near the session's end, Maya entered with a new audio recording, evidence of an internal call between a senior officer and Carter after Beckham's arrest. Everyone exchanged looks, wordless. That data would be used at the right moment, like a final blow against the silent wall built over Yetiars. The room's atmosphere was heavy, but sharp. Everyone knew, at the hearing, either they forced the system to bow, or all efforts would be buried under names silenced for too long. The state administrative building was brightly lit by white light reflecting off the ceiling lamps, stretching to the end of the hallway. The stairs leading to the second floor were covered with thick, dark blue carpet, so clean that there were footprints left. 2 security guards in black vests stood at the entrance to the hearing room, checking every list, every device, every document bag. A metal detector was placed in the middle of the passageway. Even a small signal caused anyone passing through to stop. No one spoke loudly. All exchanges were minimized, creating a solemn and suffocating atmosphere. Inside the main hall, rows of seats for the press and public were arranged in 2 separate sections. Major news outlets, such as WNS, Federal Watch, and Rights Forum were all present. In the front row, representatives from the Department of Justice and the Inspection Council adjusted their documents. All had been given several hundred pages of summarized case files, with many passages marked. Beckham's lawyers sat on the left side of the room, flipping through the files steadily, lips pressed tight in a ready stance. Opposite was the police department's legal team, faces as hard as stone, eyes fixed on the screen in front, avoiding any eye contact. In the back corner, Carter sat tucked away in the row for related personnel, eyes darting anxiously among the crowd. Nelson sat beside him, leaning inward as if trying to disappear from view. All eyes focused on the center, where the podium was placed on the polished wooden floor, a single microphone waiting for the first speaker. Beckham Brooks entered from a side door, walking straight, his black suit neat, eyes unwavering. Accompanying him were Kate Thompson and Elias, both silent but tense as drawn bows. Maya Collins sat in the journalist section, laptop on her lap, hand gripping her pen firmly. She had witnessed the arrest from the start and was now a witness through video and cross-hectored data. A few rows back in the public seats, a middle-aged woman clutched her purse tightly, her eyes reflecting anxiety. She was the one who had recorded the first video of Beckham's arrest. The gavel struck. The chairman of the hearing council, a graying man with thin-rimmed glasses, stepped to the podium, his eyes scanning the room before speaking. He declared the hearing's purpose was to verify violations of human rights, manipulation of the law enforcement system, and to review command responsibility in cases related to Mr. Beckham Brooks and involved parties. When the statement ended, the room fell into a dense silence. The rustling of paper, the switch-on of recording devices, and the steady breathing echoed clearly in the space. Beckham looked straight ahead, his eyes sharp and bright. At that moment, the hall seemed locked between two states, waiting and fear. Someone adjusted a tie, another shifted in their seat. Every gaze, from reporters to council members, was fixed on him. The unasked question shone in their eyes. Today, what will the system hear, and who will bow? Beckham stepped up to the podium in absolute silence. The sound of his shoes tapping the polished wooden floor echoed clearly in the crowded hall. He carried no papers, did not glance sideways, eyes fixed firmly on the hearing council. For a moment, his presence seemed to fill the entire space, not by appearance, but by a decisive, calm aura that commanded respect. That morning I was just leaving a diner, Beckham said. Not loud, not hurried, but every word seemed weighed on a thin blade. I carried no banner, no slogan, I only gave a glance. And apparently that look made me a target. Some eyes in the council shifted. Some reporters began writing while Maya silently kept her camera focused, capturing every moment. Beckham paused briefly, glancing to his right, where Carter and Nelson sat with heads bowed, hands intertwined. I'm not here to tell a personal story. I'm here to speak about something that has happened for decades, but only when recorded does it force people to care. His tone deepened but remained clear. He recounted the moment he was stopped without reason, asked for identification while walking to his private car, looked at like a threat just for standing tall and not lowering his gaze. He did not narrate it like a complaint, but as if recounting every detail in a recently decrypted secret dossier. I did not resist. I asked questions, and when he had no answers, he used handcuffs. The room's pace seemed to slow. Witnesses sat silently. Those unfamiliar with the event heard the sound of justice yet to be served. But that day did not start with Carter and Nelson. Beckham continued. They are just the needleheads. The stitching lies deep in the system. A system that, if you ask why it exists, the only answer you get is, because it always has. He turned lightly to face the council directly. You ask why I am here? Because I have seen too many people like me turned into symbols of crimes never committed. Because some are quietly excluded from reports, some recordings deleted, and some lives left behind doors no one bothers to open. Beckham did not take his eyes off the council chairman. I stayed silent throughout the investigation. I knew exactly what the system would do to someone like me if I spoke early. But the day I was handcuffed in the street was the day I understood. If I remained silent, all those years pursuing justice were just self-deception. He paused, not from losing control, but to let the words sink into every bench. I am not here to ask for sympathy. I am here to demand that the truth be recognized as it is. No embellishment, no mitigation. We have had enough empty promises. Now is the time for action. A council member cleared his throat but did not interrupt. Beckham continued. I will answer every question. I am ready to confront. But before we begin, remember, today I speak not just for myself, but for those who have never had a chance to speak. He stepped back from the podium without looking back, his walk as steady as when he entered. The entire hall remained silent, a silence not born of doubt, but of knowing it was time to stop pretending they had not heard. A few eyes welled up, some hands pressed against chests. Maya lowered her camera, noting a single line, "First testimony. No one sits the same again." Carter was called first. He stood up slowly, walking toward the podium with an effort to maintain calm. His face was cold, hands clasped behind his back, looking over the hearing panel without making eye contact with Beckham. At the chairman's first question, Carter answered quickly, as if rehearsed. "I conducted the inspection due to suspicion of disorderly conduct," he said. The subject displayed defensive reactions, uncooperative speech, and a challenging gaze. A pen scratching sound from the press seats. Maya looked at Carter, tilting her head slightly, eyes fixed on the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth as he read the phrase, "challenging gaze." A panel member raised an eyebrow, asking, "Do you determine danger from a gaze?" Carter hesitated. "I am trained to detect abnormal signs," he continued in a lower tone, "and I have the authority to act before a risk occurs." When asked about the post-incident report, Carter asserted he followed procedures correctly, reported promptly, and received no internal complaints about his behavior. But his answers began to falter when a panel member cited a report as passage with vague language, lacking details, and even contradicting video recordings. Carter started repeating himself, his hands clenched repeatedly, eyes scanning around as if seeking escape. Nelson was invited to speak next. Unlike Carter, he approached the podium visibly nervous. His voice was unsteady, answers were fragmented. "I only followed Officer Carter's orders. I did not directly order the handcuffing," he explained. When asked if he noticed anything unusual in Beckham's behavior at the scene, Nelson replied, "I saw him looking straight, without a clear cooperative attitude." A soft murmur rose in the audience. Nelson felt the pressure strongly and tried to evade responsibility by emphasizing a subordinate role, but could not avoid questions about complicity. A panel member asked why he did not intervene if he saw Carter overstepping. Nelson avoided eye contact, answering, "I did not have enough grounds to oppose my direct superior at that time." The most anticipated moment came when Frank Daniels was called. He stepped up with the demeanor of someone used to facing the public. His gray suit fit well, his voice deep, each sentence carefully chosen. "We operate a unit under heavy pressure from both media and public opinion. Cases like this require a comprehensive review, not to be edited or judged emotionally." Daniels denied all allegations of systemic racial discrimination. "Personally, I have never received any official report of systematic misconduct," he said, looking straight ahead. "I believe Beckham Brooks is an idealistic person, but ideals cannot stand above organizational structure, and his unilateral investigation without reporting is a serious procedural violation." Some panel members took denser notes. Maya looked at Alias, who was clenching his hands on his knees. Daniels continued, "I do not deny the incidents occurred, but that does not mean they represent the entire force." His statement ended with a polite smile toward the panel before he returned to his seat. Yet no one in the room remained calm. What was presented, though an attempt to rationalize, revealed large gaps. Both Carter and Nelson failed to answer questions about specific behaviors, while Daniels evaded responsibility using administrative language. No one spoke during the transitional moment, but eyes from the back row, from citizens, press, and witnesses were like silent arrows aimed at the only person still sitting, Beckham. He sat motionless, hands intertwined, gaze steady as the horizon, waiting for his turn. Beckham stood after Frank Daniels returned to his seat. The atmosphere remained heavy, no one spoke, but all eyes were on him, this time not out of curiosity, but waiting for a decisive response. He stepped up to the podium for the second time, not needing to look down at his paper. His voice was steady, each word like a sharp blade touching the softest point of the earth. "We just heard 3 people say everything was done by the book, but if following procedures leads to a citizen being handcuffed without any violation, perhaps it is the procedure that needs reconsideration." He did not shout, but every word seemed to brush away dust layers from supposedly closed files. One panel member raised their head. Another stopped writing, leaned back, hand on chin, as if reconsidering something. Beckham faced Carter, his eyes unwavering. "Officer Carter said I had a challenging gaze. May I ask what kind of gaze is polite enough not to be considered a threat?" He turned back to the panel. "I did not utter a single offensive word. I did not resist. I asked for a reason, and their response was to handcuff me on the street. If that is the normal reaction, then anyone in this room could be handcuffed tomorrow just for how they look." A panel member nodded lightly. Beckham continued, now directly at Nelson. "Officer Nelson said he did not directly handcuff me and was unclear about the details, but in the recording from the body-worn microphone we recovered, there is a phrase from him, 'Just do it, don't let it cause trouble.' That sentence is not in the official report, and that means part of the truth has been omitted." Kate, sitting in the back row, looked straight at Nelson, who now lowered his head. Some panel members whispered among themselves. A few took out original files for comparison. Beckham turned toward Frank Daniels. His gaze was no longer angry, but seemed prepared long ago for this confrontation. "Mr. Daniels said he never received any official report of misconduct. I have 2 emails, one from Officer Elias sent directly to your office, and one from former Officer Devon, who resigned due to unaddressed internal complaints. Both warned of overreach and racial discrimination in the East Patrol team. Neither received any response." He pulled a printed copy from his inner jacket pocket and held it up to the panel. An assistant stepped forward to take it, passing it to the chairman. Beckham continued without waiting. "We are talking about a system that does not respond to truth, but acts quickly to protect its image. And that image weighs heavily on people like me, those who become targets simply for walking in the wrong place, looking up the wrong way, or wearing the wrong color." A female voice from the panel asked, "Do you have evidence that this is systematic behavior, not isolated incidents?" Beckham nodded. "I have records of 12 similar cases in this area over the past 2 years. 6 of those people were arrested without any formal charges filed. Among them, 5 were black, 1 was Latinx. All 6 were released after media intervention or identification by someone." A wave of murmurs rose. Maya stopped writing, looked around, then nodded softly. Elias closed his eyes for a moment, as if holding back a rising emotion. Carter and Nelson did not lift their heads. Frank Daniels shifted position, revealing, for the first time during the hearing, a clear loss of composure. Beckham ended his rebuttal with a statement not directed at anyone specifically. "I do not ask you to be angry for me. I ask you to question what has been considered normal in this system for too long. Because if a wrongful act survives due to silence, that silence is complicity." He stepped down. No one applauded. No one dared to speak. But in that space, something had changed. Not because Beckham won, but because the system had just been placed before a mirror it had long avoided. Immediately after Beckham stepped back from the lectern, just as the board began posing follow-up questions about the internal reporting system, Elias rose. He requested permission to give an additional statement as a witness who had served directly under Frank Daniels's command. The board conferred briefly, then nodded. The atmosphere tightened, as if everything had frozen in the instant before the wind could change direction. Elias walked forward slowly, carrying a thick file and a USB drive. His voice was steady, without any hint of swagger. "Over many years in the unit," he said, "I repeatedly reported violations of internal regulations, favoritism in disciplinary actions, and systemic racial bias. All those reports were ignored, or I was told to transfer temporarily. Some of my colleagues were forced to resign." He paused, one hand resting on the microphone stand. "I stayed silent because I thought I was too small to change anything. But if that silence lets people like Mr. Brooks keep having their honor broken in the street, then we are abetting wrongdoing." Maya stepped up from the press row, invited to present evidence. In her hands was a hard drive, cloned in multiple copies, containing video supplied by an anonymous source and verified through 3 independent checks. On the large screen behind them, the board ordered the selected 3-minute clip to be played. The opening frame showed a closed conference room, curtains drawn, ceiling lights illuminating a long wooden table. Frank Daniels sat at the head, a copy of Beckham's incident report before him. His voice rang out in the recording. "He's an agent, so we need to lock him down even tighter. He's not the first." The chamber fell silent. Another senior officer's voice followed. "I suggest we strip details from the report, label it controversial conduct instead of legal language." Frank nodded in the video and replied, "Don't let this light the media's fuse. Push public reaction back before it turns into a national storm." When the video stopped, several board members exchanged glances. One proposed a recess to verify authenticity. Maya answered by immediately submitting metadata, GPS coordinates matching the West Coordination Office, a timestamp the day after Beckham's arrest, and facial recognition lists for everyone in the footage. Elias produced more documents, previously encrypted internal emails. One message from Frank Daniels to the head of Human Resources ordered a reassignment for an employee who keeps raising improper questions about patrol authority. Other threads revealed a pattern of punishing young officers who pushed for policy changes. Some were demoted, others shunted to desk roles with no field contact. The dossier also contained a string of internal reports pulled from the official system, where officers admitted being pressured to draft mitigating versions using vague language to avoid legal fallout. When Elias finished, a dense silence swept in. The board chair called a 5-minute break while the technical team authenticated all data. Maya returned to the press seats, eyes on pages already filled with notes. Elias slipped into a back row, shoulders easing as if a stone had been lifted from his chest. On stage, the screen went black, reflecting faces that had begun to pale. Frank Daniels remained motionless, hands on his knees, eyes fixed on the floor. The hearing had shifted from words to evidence, and for the first time, the entire power structure behind the case was showing its true shape. Proceedings resumed after the brief recess, but the room's tone had changed entirely. Earlier, most board members maintained a neutral stance, listening to both sides. Now their eyes were direct and sharp. Doubt had no refuge. Once technicians confirmed the video's authenticity and its metadata set, the chair summoned Frank Daniels to the stand again. Daniels appeared, his usual composure gone. He avoided eye contact, flipping through documents without reading a line. Asked about the recording, he tried to keep his voice calm, but it had turned brittle. "The footage lacks full context. I was cut off from the part about protecting the department's image," a board member interrupted. "You said lock him down because he's an agent. Do you deny saying that?" Daniels faltered, silent for a few seconds, then muttered, "I was reacting under pressure." The atmosphere allowed no room for such excuses. Those who had sat with Daniels in the video now bowed their heads. One officer, whose face appeared, slipped out during the break. The remaining two avoided him, leaving an empty seat between. Frank Daniels, once a pillar of the entire system, now stood alone, abandoned by his own allies. From the witness row, Carter and Nelson watched him with changed expressions. Carter leaned toward Nelson, whispering. Nelson nodded. Both looked like sailors plotting an escape as their captain's ship began to sink. The board moved to swift deliberation. One member proposed summoning an independent oversight team to launch a criminal investigation into Frank Daniels and all involved. They also demanded the retrieval of every internal record from the past 12 months. Meetings where reports were altered, complaints handled internally, and suspicious personnel transfers. The tide had clearly turned. News outlets pushed breaking updates. Maya texted her editor to confirm details. Elias received a message from the Justice Department. His files had been forwarded to the special unit on administrative crimes tied to racial discrimination, a step he had never dared to imagine. Kate leaned toward Beckham and murmured, "We just opened a huge door, but behind it are things no one has yet dared to face." Beckham did not answer. His gaze rested on Frank Daniels, now hunched, alone on a long bench, surrounded by a suffocating emptiness. The chair announced a pause to shift into the criminal liability phase and ordered full protection for all witnesses. Judicial police escorted Daniels out through a side exit, uncuffed, yet everyone knew he would never return as commander. No one applauded. There was no noisy victory. But change had begun, not through banners but through facts and the courage to drag truth into the light. And at the center of that upheaval stood a man once arrested simply for daring to look straight ahead. After the tense hearing, the council announced Frank Daniels' indefinite suspension, formally charging him with 3 serious offenses: concealing internal misconduct, abusing power, and manipulating administrative reports. His communication devices were confiscated, data system access frozen, and contact with his former unit was prohibited. Officers Carter and Nelson were also suspended and subjected to high-level internal investigations. Their badges were revoked, and they were monitored by an independent oversight team, reflecting suspicion of systemic, coordinated wrongdoing. All officers shown in Maya's video were publicly named, with their activity logs over the past 3 years scrutinized, including cases previously dismissed as unfounded. Immediately following this, the Department of Justice confirmed the creation of a task force in cooperation with the Federal Inspector General's office to widen investigations across 6 administrative regions Daniels had led. 3 of these had prior citizen complaints that had never been publicly addressed. An independent committee was also formed to review the entire internal complaint and denunciation system of the past 5 years, prioritizing cases that were abruptly closed or suspiciously handled. Within law enforcement, reactions quietly split. Young officers sent letters to the Ministry of the Interior supporting the hearing, seeing it as a genuine chance to restore honor to those believing in justice. Beckham and Elias were frequently cited as courageous role models. Conversely, conservative factions denounced the process as politicization of the security sector, accusing the media of distorting facts and damaging morale. A notable development was an invitation from the Inspector General's office for Beckham, Elias, and Kate to serve as independent advisors on the Oversight Committee restructuring the regional police unit. Though lacking executive power, they could propose policy changes, suggest improvements in complaint handling, and monitor reform effectiveness. This move acknowledged their critical roles in exposing systemic problems. By evening, the news dominated primetime broadcasts. The hearing was dissected in detail with session clips, expert commentary, and coverage of Beckham's steadfast journey. Many channels labeled him the man who stared down the system. Panel discussions emphasized how one individual's refusal to remain silent can ignite change. The momentum extended beyond the media. Peaceful protests took place in numerous cities outside government buildings and police stations, featuring simple banners with Beckham's portrait and the slogan, "Eyes Don't Lie." The atmosphere was urgent yet peaceful, demanding systemic reform rather than focusing on a single individual. Human rights organizations submitted joint petitions calling for review and reform of complaint handling in law enforcement. This sparked a surge of complaints from hundreds of victims of similar abuses, creating a domino effect. Names and cases once forgotten or dismissed resurfaced at prosecutors' desks. The Federal Inspector General's office reported receiving over 370 complaints within 2 weeks of the hearing. Maya Collins emerged alongside Beckham as a central figure. Her released data and discreet investigative work made her a staple at press conferences and international forums, where she spoke on journalism's role in public oversight. Her article, "One Eye, A Shaken System," was translated into multiple languages and widely shared, becoming part of curricula at leading journalism schools. However, challenges persisted. Some conservative media questioned Beckham's motives, alleging he orchestrated the incident for personal gain, and dissecting his past to undermine his credibility. Beckham chose silence, avoiding media appearances and granting interviews only at closed legal and professional seminars. His rare photographed moments showed the same calm, focused resolve. Gradual systemic changes began. Some police academies incorporated civil rights, bias awareness, and ethics training. Local governments in major cities made internal complaint procedures public and issued monthly updates for citizen oversight. Although slow, these reforms marked a clear shift, rooted in a hearing once deemed unlikely to disrupt a deeply entrenched system. This hearing became a turning point, not by force or slogans, but through facts, determination, and the steady presence of those once sidelined. From the sidelines, Beckham and his allies stepped into the center of a long overdue transformation. As the final pieces of evidence were laid out, the Internal Oversight Board had no choice but to issue an immediate suspension of Frank Daniels pending a full investigation. The internal meeting recordings, manipulated reports, and suspicious patterns in complaint processing formed an undeniable chain of misconduct. Officers Carter and Nelson were detained for criminal investigation on charges of abuse of authority and unlawful arrest. The official announcement was delivered in a tense courtroom, but for Beckham, Kate, and their team, it marked the first hard-won victory after weeks of intense resistance. The Federal Bureau of Investigation followed up by confirming the launch of a broader probe into associated departments, including the internal report filtering system Daniels had overseen. The moment the decision was read aloud, hundreds outside the courthouse rose to their feet in a wave of applause. The Black community, civil rights organizations, and even previously silent voices began to speak out in firm support. National media outlets ran non-stop coverage. From CNN to The Guardian, headlines called the outcome a pivotal step toward transparency in law enforcement. Articles, documentaries, and interviews with Beckham quickly went viral, turning him into a new symbol of justice and resilience. Meanwhile, several local police departments began internally auditing their operations, fearing they might be swept up in the expanding federal probe. State-level politicians began releasing public statements in favor of reform, sensing the shifting political tide. As for Beckham, he quietly left the courthouse without celebration or closing remarks. Beneath the fading light of that evening, he understood the battle was far from over, but in this opening round, they had won. The hearing ended, but its impact rippled deeply. More than a decade after protests and failed reforms, the Beckham-Brooks case reignited hope, not through slogans, but real change. Frank Daniels was immediately suspended. Federal investigators reviewed 15 years of files exposing a cover-up network and shaking law enforcement. Support for Beckham grew openly. The media praised his fight as a historic rewrite of justice. Civil groups used his case for education, and a New York documentary company proposed telling his story, not to glorify, but to reveal survival. Beckham kept a distance from fame, refusing offers and insisting he didn't act alone, crediting Maya, Elias, and Kate. Yet, behind the applause, a wound remained, the betrayal of trusting a broken system. 1 month later, Beckham spoke at a quiet forum about responsibility and the cost. No cheers followed, just a long pause, as listeners grasped his true struggle. He then joined a training program for new officers, teaching practical ethics through his story. Maya and Elias contributed media literacy and ethical tests, challenging trainees to question biases. Many graduates chose reform roles, rewriting codes and serving troubled areas. Beckham's team stayed connected, each advancing justice in their fields. Before new recruits, Beckham asked, "When orders clash with conscience, what lets you face yourself?" Outside, sunlight poured in, a reminder that true victory lies in shaping future minds. If this story made you think, share it so others can reflect too. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that inspire and challenge. Justice doesn't wear a badge or need a title. It lives in every act of courage, every honest question, and every refusal to bow to injustice.